Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, LLG's Executive Director of Policy and Governance, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hello, everybody.
Now then, in a week where politics continues to dominate and the rule of law is once again thrust into the limelight, Dennis and I will take you through some of the big news of the week which affects local government. So, Dennis, what's up first?
Well, no apologies from me for putting the pre-election period on our slate for today. 2024 is expected to be one of the most toxic and challenging series of elections in recent years, and for a variety of reasons. Challenges will come in all forms, especially for things that happen in the run-up period to elections. And with just 8 weeks to go to the start of the pre-election period, I start with my own personal checklist for monitoring officers and governance and election specialists. But remember, the pre-election period does not mean that usual council business has to stop. Far from it. But there are rules and restrictions that apply, and therefore it's important to have in place a mechanism to assess how you should proceed. So here we go. The latest date that the pre-election period can start for the local elections is Tuesday, the 26th of March. For the Mayor of London and London Assembly elections, the latest date that the pre-election period can start is Tuesday, the 19th of March. So here is my pre-election checklist. Well, it's more a 10-point to-do list to ensure compliance with the Code on Local Authority Publicity. Number 1, first, set up a dedicated governance team now to ensure Publicity Code compliance and to be a point of contact for queries and questions. Include in the team your key governance, legal, committee and comms people. 2, hold a diary review of events due to take place during the pre-election period. Get hold of the Mayor's diary, the Leader's diary, and those of Cabinet members and scrutiny chairs as a minimum, but that should be enough. 3, increase awareness of the need to comply with the code itself. Circulate the LGA template letter to all councillors. It's in Bulletin 3 along with a collection of other useful guidance. 4, review all planned events and either rearrange or reorganise. For example, can an officer take the place of an elected member at a launch or public event? 5, social media and online channels. Allocate somebody with specific responsibility to have oversight and to react to issues concerning this important area. 6, likewise with press releases, newsletters, magazines and photo calls. These all really do require special attention and care. 7, scrutiny deserves special consideration also. Liaise with the chairs and lead officers in this area and reorganise where necessary any particular scrutiny plans during the pre-election phase that are especially sensitive. 8, officer awareness. The PERDA period, as it used to be called, is misunderstood, and that misunderstanding extends to officers at all levels in my experience. So generate officer awareness of the Publicity Code requirements and the need to signpost queries to your team. And remember, for the most part, the message is business as usual. 9, react to challenges. As I said, this is likely to be a toxic and challenging time, and those challenges will become complaints in some form or other. And finally, number 10, regroup at the end of the May elections and identify what worked and what didn't. Helen.
Great advice, Dennis. And of course, for all those requiring a guiding hand on all things elections, LLG are holding a one-day elections conference on the 1st of March, which you can book via the training pages of our website. Now, relating to the elections is, of course, criminal record checks on councillors. And the Minister, Simon Hoare, has sent a letter to the leaders of all unitary and upper tier authorities in England, together with the chair of the LGA, drawing their attention to the recommendation in Simon Bailey's independent review of the disclosure and barring regime concerning the eligibility of local councillors for criminal record checks. So the purpose of the review, which was commissioned by the Home Office, was to provide assurance to ministers about the effectiveness of the disclosure and barring regime in safeguarding children and vulnerable adults. Part of the review considered the regime with regard to eligibility of local councillors for criminal record checks provided by the Disclosure and Barring Service. With specific reference to local authorities, the review at the time made the following recommendation, and it was recommendation 5, that an enhanced criminal record check should be made mandatory for all councillors in unitary and upper tier authorities who are being considered for appointment to any committee involved in decisions on the provisions of children's services or services for vulnerable adults. The review acknowledged that this would require legislation, but in the meantime, it recommended that those authorities adopt that procedure. So in his letter, Mr. Hoare stated that the government strongly supports the recommendation and urged enhanced DBS checks to be adopted as best practice for all councillors being considered for appointment to any committee which discharges education or social services functions. Such roles are eligible for enhanced DBS checks. He states his clear view that there is a reputational benefit in councils being both consistent and robust on adopting the recommendation. And he added in the meantime that the government would keep under review the case for mandating enhanced criminal record checks. Now, sticking with the government, what more information do we now know about the function of OFLOG, Dennis?
Well, Helen, this is interesting because we've covered stories about OFLOG a couple of times now. But little by little, we are discovering what it is really going to do. Here's more on this. The Office for Local Government, or OFLOG, will publish reports on councils as part of its early warning system aimed at spotting failing local authorities. In a letter responding to questions asked by the Levelling Up Committee, Local Government Minister Simon Hoare and OFLOG's interim chair Lord Morse noted that the early warning system would have two parts. Firstly, it will have a new internal desk-based early warning system using qualitative and quantitative data along with what's described as soft intelligence to identify councils and combined authorities potentially at risk of developing serious problems of leadership, governance, or culture. Secondly, it will carry out a set of early warning conversations with some councils and combined authorities identified as potentially at risk. These conversations will establish the type and degree of risk and allow OFLOG to make recommendations for improvement, Lord Morse said. OFLOG plans for the first of these conversations to take place in mid-2024. And as part of this, OFLOG will publish a report setting out the evidence, conclusions and recommendations to the local authority concerned. The system will make it easier for government to identify authorities that have financial problems but not flag them to central government. Lord Morse emphasised that OFLOG will not be making any judgment about the necessity of formal intervention, which he said is the responsibility of the Department for Levelling Up and the Best Value Framework. OFLOG was launched in July of last year with the strategic objectives to empower citizens with data about their council, to increase local leaders and councils' understanding of their performance, and also to increase central government's understanding of local government performance. But as we now see here, the detail of how it will work with authorities is only gradually being revealed. Helen.
I'd be interested to hear from members as to how they intend to oversee the data submissions at their local authorities, whether they're being asked to monitor compliance or whether this function is being given to a dedicated officer, and if so, at what level. Will councillors receive a standing report and likewise SLT? Do let us know in the forum. Now, last week in the vlog, Dennis and I discussed the worrying increase in abuse against councillors and officers. And indeed, LLG have now issued out a short survey to our monitoring officer membership to obtain some up-to-date statistics to inform what we might do moving forward. Right now, however, with canvassing no doubt in the mind of councillors, the LGA have published some very helpful advice. The guidance, which is available on their website, complements their civility and public life resources, the Be a Councillor campaign, and the Councillor's Guide to Handling Harassment, Abuse and Intimidation. So their principles for safe canvassing are as follows, and I'll give a little short explanation as we go. So be prepared, not scared. And this is about regularly assessing risks and seeking available training and support, including advice from local police parties or the council itself. Trusting your instincts for personal safety during canvassing to ensure a confident and secure approach. focus on group safety, which means basically canvass in pairs for safety. Apparently it's more enjoyable, and other people should be aware of your whereabouts at all times. Actively communicate with the team and set periodic check-ins. Use technology to make canvassing safer. This is about wearing devices and tracking apps for mobile phones, and familiarizing yourself with emergency features of technology to enhance safety whilst canvassing. Be security aware. This is about prioritizing safety and security, so carrying only essentials and avoid going into residents' homes. Keep a record, so maintaining a detailed incident log and report any uncomfortable situations encountered while canvassing. This will ensure appropriate awareness and action if necessary. And finally, prioritise aftercare and set emergency protocols. So this is about offering team support after any experiences of abuse or intimidation, holding debriefing sessions, which should encourage sharing of experiences and seeking support, focusing on both the positive and negative encounters, and then also periodically reviewing emergency response procedures. So it's a useful little guide. Please direct it to your councillors for their attention. Now, Dennis, I was absolutely delighted to read about the appointment of the new Lord Chief Justice. Tell us more.
Well, yes, England and Wales has its first lady Lord Chief Justice, and she's been in office now for just over 4 months. Surprising, really, that this hasn't attracted far more headlines. But Sue Carr, who took over from Lord Burnett, has made her mark with government, making it clear to them that the separation of powers between government and judiciary is not to be messed with. Here's the detail. Less than 4 months into her role, the First Lady Chief Justice has already shown more inclination to stand up to politicians than many of her male predecessors managed across their entire tenures. In one fell swoop, in her first appearance before Parliament's Justice Committee, Dame Sue Carr challenged the government on 2 main political stories of the day: the Rwanda refugee scheme and the response to the Post Office IT scandal. Carr first stated that decisions on how judges were deployed were exclusively a matter for the judiciary, after the government said it would move 150 judges to deal with migrant appeals under the new Rwanda law, as it seeks to allay concerns from Conservative MPs about the bill. Carr said that headlines related to the move drew matters of judicial responsibility into the political arena, and that it was important that people understand that clear division. And at the same committee meeting, Carr rejected the notion that the judiciary had approved government legislation that would grant blanket exoneration to everyone convicted as a result of the Post Office Horizon IT scandal. Such a move would mean, she said, bypassing the Court of Appeal, the normal avenue for challenging convictions, and had already raised concerns about ministers encroaching upon the independence of the judiciary. And she said it was untrue that the judiciary would be unable to deal with the volume of outstanding cases arising from the scandal. More than 600 unsafe convictions have yet to be quashed. Now, in one sense, Carr was sticking to her job, given that her responsibilities include representing the views of the judges and deciding the court areas in which individual judges sit and allocating work to the courts in England and Wales. But her robust stance was nevertheless unusual, because her predecessors have often been at pains to avoid being seen to contradict, never mind criticise, the government of the day. Helen.
Well, I heard the expression lefty lawyers again in the news last week, and it did make me wince, Dennis. Perhaps there needs to be a broader education about the absolute necessity of a separation of powers within a democracy. Now, my last item today centres on a report by the Health and Social Care Committee, which calls for the government to proceed without delay on the steps needed to update the Decent Home Standard for social housing tenants and set out a timetable for its extension to cover the private rented section. MPs concluded that the less well-off and those living in less well-off neighbourhoods, unsurprisingly, are much more likely to develop life-limiting health conditions and to die prematurely from the effects of those conditions. The most serious housing hazards include fire and electrical risks, excess cold, excess heat, damp, and mould and air pollution. Now, the committee is chaired by Steve Brine MP, and it's recommended, amongst other things, and I'll concentrate on a few here, that the government proceeds without delay in the consultation necessary to update the Decent Home Standard for the social rented sector and in implementing a Decent Home Standard for the private rented sector and set out a timetable for doing so. That the government consult on both the content of existing design and space standards as they relate to health and on the implications of making such standards mandatory for new dwellings, both for developments requiring standard planning consent and for both householder and change of use PDR development. Now, the Office for Health Improvements and Disparities, that they should be made a statutory consultee for new large housing developments, building on the role already accorded to the Active Travel England in supporting inclusive, effective and health protecting development. And that the DHSC work with NHS England and existing networks and providers to develop a national strategy for social prescribing to improve confidence in official social and community-based solutions to unmet social needs. Chair of the Health and Social Committee, Care Committee, as I've mentioned, Steve Brine, said in relation to the report that poor quality homes can have a catastrophic impact on the health of those who live in them. The death of 2-year-old Awab Ishaq from a respiratory condition caused by mould in his home should leave ministers in no doubt that tenants in both the social and private rented sectors deserve greater protection by law. It's a good report to read to understand the broader picture of those affected by poor housing. And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 3 of 2024, available on the LLG website now. So it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.
Have a good week.